what's up, everyone? This is Tsunami exclusive interviews, and we have a very special guest, very well known around Sacramento in the poetry community. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Andru Defeye, Guerrilla Poet Laureate turned actual Poet Laureate of Sacramento.
Thank you for coming in. Thank you. It's a huge honor to get you to come in today. Do you want to explain a little bit about yourself and your career so far to our guests? See why I'm so excited to have you in today.
Yeah, absolutely. I came to Sacramento 2009. I get started at an organization called Soul Collective. We started an event called Microphone Mondays, which was a wild open mic. We had turn up time. We had something called the hater screen where you could text in anonymously to a screen behind the performers to let them know what you think of their performance. It was real wild. And then eventually, I was young and I didn't know how to delegate, and I was learning, and we lost the venue because it was just too many people in a space with one person trying to regulate it all. And so because of that, we needed some new venues. We went looking for venues, and we found that as soon as we said that we did hip hop at this open mic, a lot of venues wouldn't allow us to be in the space. So we started doing these, what we call guerrilla art flash mobs. And so we would set up a hotline and people would come in and show up into a venue unannounced, and then everybody would spend money at that venue and we'd turn it into this open mic, and it just became this like phenomenon of just kind of wild, unpredictable performance art in the city. And that's really like where I found my love, was creating art in spaces where it wasn't historically. So that leads to a whole collective called ZFG, Zero Forbidden Goals, and it's like 10 years of running around the city and showing love and creating art in spaces where it doesn't exist. And 2020, I become the youngest poet laureate in Sacramento history. And the next 5 years, there's a pandemic, there's the political uprisings. Personally, I went through a lot as far as losing a lot of people and a lot of grief. So that was the last 5 years of my life as poet laureate, and that leads to the new book, and that's where we are now.
Well, a few questions. Can you explain to the viewers what Poet Laureate is? Not too many are familiar with the term laureate.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of the homies don't know what a poet laureate is, and didn't until I became one, and I had to be like, hey, so what do you mean?
Put some respect on it.
What I always tell kids is it means that I can spit poems with more marshmallows in my mouth than any other poet in the city. And I've proven that over and over again in classrooms. Try me. But what it really means is I'm the city's official poet. When the mayor is doing something in the arts and wants to start off with a big energy, I get a call. It means when there were some folks who were showing up to city council meetings on some real anti-Semite stuff. And so I got to make a call to the city and be like, hey, let me speak, So it grants me some real beautiful opportunities to speak at a city level and to have people listen. And that's something that I take really, it's a real heavy responsibility.
That's really good that you've been able to impact the community in multiple ways. It seems like you've been in classrooms, museum stages. What's your favorite setting to perform in?
My favorite setting to perform in is absolutely the street. Absolutely. And anywhere, not even just the street. We could be inside four walls, but somewhere where they're not expecting it, where they didn't expect poetry, where people, they came just thinking they were getting some coffee or checking out some art, or, I like to surprise people with the art. I'm a big fan of forced empathy as well, right? I think poetry is a great way to make people feel something, and when we can share a feeling, that's common ground. that we can really build on as people. So it's absolutely my favorite to be somewhere where poetry shouldn't be or isn't normally. I love performing in spaces where people are just like, poetry.
Have you ever, say, converted anybody into liking poetry, or like, really exposed someone to a new art form?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's the whole name of the game, is to really shift what people think poetry is. A lot of us get scarred by the educational system into thinking that poetry is roses are red and violets are blue and poetry sucks and so do you. And they teach the canon is Walt Whitman and William Shakespeare and a bunch of old dead white men who don't look or feel like most of the kids in the classroom, right? Like, so how do we then make it relevant? And a lot of us grew up for generations. It's been like that. So, almost every time that I perform somewhere, especially when I'm out in the public, people will come up and be like, I didn't know poetry was that. I didn't know poetry could do that. And that's, from open mic stages or events with the city to, TED Talks did the same thing, where people were up like, I did not know that poetry, when did poetry start doing that? And it's like, the last 20 years, there's been some real big evolution in poetry. 84, the slam is invented. And then since then, there's just been all of this evolution around spoken word. And, it's led to a lot of slam voice and a lot of people doing the same thing. But there's also some people really innovating the art form. So, yeah.
That's dope. That's dope. I have a personal experience with that. I was just recently exposed to poetry, at City Sound. And I went to a poetry event last year, my first time to go into a poetry event, hearing poetry outside of school. And I had wrote a few things very William Shakespeare-esque, because that's what I thought. I was like, stanzas and rhyme schemes and things like that, which I think is still pretty cool. But when I went there, it was very different, than what I was expecting. Very emotional. It was like you said, I didn't know that's what poetry could be, So lots of different types of poetry, slam poetry, So I could definitely attest to that, And I was like, it helped me grow as a personal poet, So.
Yeah, I think the beauty in poetry is that it helps us get things outside of us that don't need to be living inside of us a lot of the time, right? Like when I talk to young people and young poets, that's generally how a lot of us get into poetry, is like, I'm having such a hard day right now. When I go into classrooms, I say, how many of y'all are poets? And when none of the kids raise their hands, I say, okay, so I can go through everybody's notes apps.
No.
Never.
Exactly.
You see everybody tighten up, because when you have a hard day, that's where we all go, right? So it's a natural thing that we do. So poetry is just the extension of that. Like, how do you put it down on paper so it lives on this paper? And then from that paper, you could crumple that paper up and throw it away. You could light it on fire. You could save it forever and frame it. But you get to decide what to do with it. Where sometimes when these emotions live inside of us, we're not in control of them, right? Like they control us. Where if we get them outside of us, then we're a little more in control of them,
That's almost exactly what art is, expressing yourself and doing what you want with it. Not everyone agrees with, how everyone expresses themselves through art, but, you can agree that they express themselves or express an idea, a thought, form, something.
Yeah, it's alchemy when done right. Art, like you take the pain and you turn it into power, right? Transmutation is exactly the word for it, right? Like my journey in poetry starts because I'm born with this wild medical condition where I was born without stomach muscles. Wow. And all of my childhood is spent in hospitals and in pain.
Do you know what that condition's called?
Yeah, it's called Prune belly syndrome, aka Eagle Barrett syndrome. And so they said I would never walk. They said I would never skate. I would never dance. I would never, all of these things.
Here you are.
And I'm they said I wasn't supposed to make it past 15 years old. I'm 40 years old now. And a lot of that I credit to having a system of being able to get things out of me, right? You know, as a young person, very young, I was dealing with a lot of heavy, overwhelming emotions. And I think that's a lot of young people, especially today. The depression and the anxiety are hitting in rates that we've never seen before. And so, you know, that's the reason for poetry. So I try to tell people this is about saving lives. It's not just about forms and sonnets and stanzas, because I don't personally care too much about any of the forms, or like if you want to learn that, there's a lot of YouTube channels you can go to learn that stuff. But what I'm interested in teaching young people is how, you know, I say poetry is how we speak ourselves into existence, you know? And how do you do magic with this poetry, with this hip hop, with these songs? Anytime you're writing words, they call it spelling for a reason, you know what I mean? Like, so we're really manifesting and putting things out, into speaking them into reality, you know what I mean? So that's the power of poetry. That's the power of songwriting, music, all of it, anything with the words.
What made you realize poetry was what it was for you? You mentioned the stomach condition, but when was it that you realized you could express yourself through poetry?
You know, it's interesting, because I told myself I was going to stop telling this story, but
One last time.
yeah, I was like 12 years old. And my first poem was a suicide note. I didn't want to be here. And I knew one thing was, if I was going to leave a note, it was going to be the prettiest, most heartfelt. No one's ever going to have cried harder than they would have cried finding this note. And in writing it, I put together such a strong language and strong feeling. And it was a wave of emotions, and I captured it. And it was the first time that I felt like I was really good at something, you know?
Like you made a piece of art?
Because of my condition, I wasn't good at sports. I didn't have confidence, so I couldn't talk to girls, you know what I mean? I didn't have that thing to hold my head up and my shoulders back about. And when I wrote that, I was like, oh, there's my power, right? So it was like, well, I'm gonna carry on, number one. And I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm gonna keep doing this writing thing. And it helped it also get out of me, right? Because the intention that I had when I started writing that wasn't the same intention that I had when I got done with it, right? So I learned right then that, like, if you put it down, you'll feel better, right? So yeah, that's my personal story in that. Yeah, I recommend to anyone that struggles with suicidal ideation to put thoughts down on paper. Again, get them out of you. I also want to say for the record that poetry is therapeutic, but it is not therapy, y'all. Go get professional help. It's great. I highly recommend. I'm a big fan. I'm someone who, like, you know, professes therapy. My therapist does and has done wonders for me. So, you know, do both. Do therapy and get a therapist. Or do poetry and get a therapist.
Real quick, does your stomach condition affect you as an adult? I see you, you know, you look like a very healthy, you know, adult, you know.
Yeah, my condition absolutely does. Not having stomach muscles, I'm very miraculous in the fact that my obliques and my side muscles kind of compensated in a way that not everybody's do, which also means my back muscles had to compensate there, and other back, everything's kind of compensating for everything. So I do deal with a lot of chronic pain, a lot of back issues, you know, so there's definitely like things that happen with having kidneys and bladder condition and everything that's all tied into the condition as well. Sometimes there's, you know, risk of kidney infections get pretty bad. So I just got to really take care of myself. There's a lot of self-care. There's a lot of being in tune with my body. You know, I don't party too hard. I don't, you know, go too wild these days. When I was younger, I was a little wilder. But now I'm really working to like take care of myself and keep myself in a good working order so I can be around for a little while.
That's good, and it shows, you know. It's good. Was there a specific moment that made you want to merge art with education and community organizing?
So I barely graduated from a continuation school the day of graduation. Wow. And it wasn't because I was stupid at all. It's because I was bored. And
it's a big reason.
When they tell you that you should have been dead a year ago and you think that you're probably not going to live to 18, it's really hard to convince you to do your homework. Why I need to do homework, you know? Like, it makes more sense for me to go have fun and hang out with people because I may only have a year left.
It must have been hard living with that impending doom in your younger years.
It was, and it was also such a blessing because it shaped, you know, I didn't have the same luxury that people had when they were like, well, I'll get to that someday. I'll do that someday. I'll pursue that dream someday. You know, when I first got into music, it was like, you know, I don't know how much time I got left. I'm going to go full board into this.
So truly living every day like your last.
Yeah, I absolutely live with a deathbed philosophy. And I think that really benefits me in a lot of ways where, again, a lot of people will put things off and someday I'll get there and someday I'll do that thing. And for me, there was always this sense of urgency. When I think about like being the youngest poet laureate, you know, there's a position and most people are over 60, 65 and retired when they get this position. I was 35 and it was because I don't know how long I have, you know what I mean? And none of us do. Right? Like, so it's really like a blessing to be able to live in that presentness because it's the reality for all of us, right? Like, I'm just a little more aware of it and have been a little more aware of it. But yeah, I think that to get back to the question of like merging art and education is like, because I come from this place where education was, they just like threw us in a room, you know, and just kind of expected us to make do. We didn't, at the continuation school, we didn't even have the computers and the supplies and the resources that we should have had, you know. But everyone at that school was the most creative kids in the city, right? Like, that's where all the creatives ended up, was at the continuation school, because the traditional high school was round peg, square hole, right? Like, but because there was no, we didn't have computers with Photoshop, nobody had Premiere, nobody had, if you would have given that continuation school those resources, I promise you my people would be working at Pixar right now, you know, like, but there was no resources, so I love to go into schools and be a resource. I love to go into continuation schools and tell those kids, like, you just as good as not, if not better and more creative than these other kids over here. And I know that you got adults telling you that your brain doesn't work right or you're lesser than because your brain works a certain way. But I'm here to tell you, like, you know, I got a key to the city sitting on the wall at the house and my brain works the same way yours does. You know what I mean? Like, and just that example of like, I come from the same place. When I got Poet Laureate, the first thing I wanted to do was go back to my continuation school with a big ass cake and just be like, yo, we did it. Like the underdog kids, the kids that weren't supposed to. We always been the most creative, you know? Like, a lot of the artists that you know struggled getting good grades, right? because they're creative. They're trying to be over here, right? Like creating something versus like repeating something and regurgitating something, which is what the education system is built on, right? Um, so yeah, that's my reason for mixing the art and the education, and yeah, just what we can bring to it. And again, because the poetry education is toxic, all of it is just like so patriarchal.
Kids are tired of reading him.
Yeah, white supremacists. They don't, and when the kids don't see themselves in it, that's one of the beautiful things we did for Sacramento Poetry Day. When we brought that back in 2022, we built a curriculum that's all Sacramento poets and made it available for free to the 250,000 kids in all of Sacramento in Sac County, right? So that way the curriculum looks like, feels like the city. The kids see themselves reflected in it. They see, oh, I could be a poet. I could have written that, right? Like, so that's been one of the big pushes for me in my laureateship, was to like make poetry representative, because it's been accessible. You can go to the library and go to the poetry section and get free poetry. But does it look like you? Does it feel like you? Does it represent you? And the answer for too long for these young people in Sacramento is that it didn't. Which was crazy, because out on the street corner it did. You know what I mean? Like on the street corner, you have a slam poet that leads into some rap, into some, like, folks, it's a cipher. You know what I mean? And it was there. So, you know, we're just trying to connect the young people with that as the poetry in the city, and not this William Shakespeare, Walt Whitman shit.
What was one of the biggest challenges into bringing curriculum into traditional classroom spaces?
The biggest challenges are always working with the systems. You may have heard the phrase that you'll never tear down the master's house with the master's tools. You know what I'm saying? So working within some of these systems, navigating some of these systems, and like shout out to people who are inside of these systems who I had help from and have been connected with, and are still helping me, right? Because it's, you know, you would think, yeah, I'm the Poet Laureate of the city. We created a free curriculum that is inclusive and representative. So I should just have to make like 3 phone calls and have these people pass it off to the teachers and right? It should be a simple process. And it turns out that is not at all the process, because this school district, they can't actually talk to the teachers because they got to go through the union, and they got a situation here, and then everybody reports to the county office of education, but they can't actually mandate. So there's a whole system that you have to navigate, and it's frustrating. It's always frustrating to navigate systems, whether it's the city
Especially
government
governmental
system, the education system, systems are in there for a reason, and a lot of that is to uphold a lot of this bullshit that we're trying to break down.
It's hard to, change anything, and it's so overconvoluted, and there's so many different entities that have compartmentalized control over things.
Absolutely. So figuring out who has the control, who do you even need to sit down with, right? Like figuring out who your gatekeepers are, and then being able to convince them, right? Connecting with them on that like spiritual, emotional level, and not just on, let's talk business, right? Because I don't care to talk business. I'm not a capitalist, you know what I mean? Like, so yes, it definitely comes with its challenges, but then Sacramento Poetry Week, there's days where I get to zoom into classrooms and talk to kids who've been studying my poetry, which is the wildest, most beautiful, you hope for that kind of ripple, and to be able to actually experience it is something different. And I've been able to give that to my friends too, a lot of my homies will do the zoom ins, and they're in the curriculum, so they get to have that same moment where a classroom full of third graders is like, oh my God, because they've been studying your work. You're famous to them. And that's who the kids in the community should be looking to, is the artists in the community, the poets in the community, the sculptors, the painters. They should be seeing those people in their
Like seeing people from their own city who made it.
Yeah,
who are doing things so they can see that they can do it too.
Yeah, why are they looking at Taylor Swift? She ain't from here. You know what I mean? Like that, her poets, whatever her tortured poets thing was, like that ain't. It doesn't feel like Sacramento.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But we have them here, right? So that's always is the idea is like building the ecosystem for the next 20 years, right? I want these kids who are studying these poets, growing up in 10 years, going to an open mic and being like, oh my God, it's J-Ro. I remember studying her work in 5th grade, like, you know, and yeah, just building the ecosystem.
What was the acclaim of your curriculum? Did you hear any feedback?
Yeah.
Do you know how many schools, like, you know, do you have any kind of...
Oh man, what was it's hard to measure the number of schools because the curriculum is just free.
Yeah, it's free.
So
they just download it for sure.
And take
Yeah.
it. But we hear, you know, Twin Rivers did a whole situation with them where we had poets come into the classrooms.
I work in the Twin Rivers.
Last year they had a whole poetry day event with the district, which was great. Sac City Unified has given us a resolution for the last 2 years that just, you know, really recognizes it district-wide. So, you know, we've made a big ripple on the district level. I think we're still working on the classroom level to make sure that we're getting into every classroom, because that becomes, again, the district level is like up here, and then the classroom level, it doesn't always get from the district to the classroom. So
and then sometimes teachers do have control over the individual group. Sometimes they'll be like, I'm not,
yeah,
we're skipping this today.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely. Well, and a lot of them have a tough time teaching poetry, you know? So if I can get to them and say, hey, this exists, and it's, you know, on the package it says which core education standards that it meets for which grades, and so that they get this like, oh, because I'm
The teachers are probably learning from the curriculum themselves.
yeah,
like, wow.
because they're not poets.
Yeah.
So how could they know how to teach poetry? I couldn't teach a painting class because I'm not a painter. You know what I mean? So I think just giving them that, and I love working with teachers to be like, this is how you teach poetry, right? Instead of bringing in some Shakespeare for the kids, why don't you have them bring in some classroom, whatever you deem classroom appropriate, have them bring in some lyrics that they're listening to currently, and let's talk about the poetry that's like surrounding them. Let's talk about contemporary poetry, and that's what Taylor Swift and Jelly Roll and NBA Youngboy are, is contemporary poetry, right? Yeah.
So let's talk about ZFG, Zero Forbidden Goals. What was the mission of that collective? You know, talk about that for us.
Yeah. ZFG, Zero Forbidden Goals. When we in the schools and in the community, zero fucks given when we amongst ourselves, and both of those theories also zero fear granted, right? Like all of those all of those connecting on the same theory, you know, that you can do it. We believed in each other, and we believed in the power of the collective, right? It started as a bunch of young artists that were going to open mic. I had a young man named Luke Taylor who has gone on to do some amazing things, but he was a poet at the time, wanted to be a rapper, and knew that I had made that transition and did both things. He came up and said, "Yo, can you teach me how to do that rap shit?" And I was like, yeah. So we started working together, and then all of a sudden this other young man come up and said, "You're the guy who works with Luke Taylor. I want to do what he does." And I said, "Okay, well, you gotta listen to me then." And so I kind of start coaching these guys, and then all of a sudden it's just one after another, right? And the gang kind of comes together and just like, 10 of us or so, and we all knew that's when the guerrilla stuff kind of popped off. So everybody's talented, and we all know that we got a collective, right? So we always had the strength in numbers. So we could go into a spot and just be like, everybody ready? And everybody start busting from different corners. And it turns into a thing because there's 5 to 10 of us that are ready to go at all times, And that was kind of, for years, people would be like, is it a rap group? Is it a poetry group? Is it an art collective? What do you call yourselves? And one day, somebody asked me, and I was standing next to 2 of the other guys. I said, I answer that question all the time. I want to hear how y'all answer it. And David DeMola said, we're a support group for artists. And I was like, bruh, that's it. That's what we are. I've never heard it put better. All we were was a collective of artists that really believed in each other, that really pep talked each other, that really worked on the craft with each other. I tell people we'll meet every Monday night at the crib. We broke bread together. That's where a lot of the ideas happen and a lot of the actual community. We don't break bread enough together. And then folks are performers. So we put 2 of them face to face and be like, all right, go. And then they both start spitting their verses this far from each other's faces, and whoever drop it first loses. Next one in. You know what I mean? Like training. These folks we trained hard together. We trained in the streets, right? So if you're performing in the streets, you gotta be dope to get people to stop. Right? You don't have a captive audience. These people didn't pay to get in here, so they don't care to walk away from you. Right? So it breeds a different kind of performer. So you see years later, some of those members, including Hobo Johnson. Hobo Johnson blows up, international success. Phil Harmonic comes from that crew too. Won NPR Tiny Desk. Paul Willis went out to Boston and took over BAMS Fest and was doing the Boston Art and Music Fest and is now working on the hip hop leadership book. Avery Wright wrote a novel that turned into a play that turned into a comic book for young adults dealing with anxiety. I believe the success
really cool.
is partially due to everybody having that support system that was like, no, you could do that.
Yeah, for
no,
sure.
you absolutely can.
A lot of people have ideas, but then it takes other people to really be like, that's a good idea, for them to be, maybe I should, fully commit to this.
And more than even that, I'm gonna see you next week. And I'm gonna be like, yo, how's it going? You start working on that thing that you said you were gonna start working on? No? Why not? All right, I'm gonna see you next Monday. You better be on it. I want this done and this done, right? And that part of holding each other accountable to our creativity. And knowing that whenever I had some wild idea, I had crew that was down with it, right? We did an event at something called Art Street, where they took over this abandoned warehouse and over by Leotata Floyd. And they took over this warehouse, gave it to some artists. The artists all created an amazing installation. But the reality was that it's right next to the projects. And on the map, they took the CV Circle projects off the map for this development. So it was some real gentrification stuff. And a lot of times the artists get used for that, right? And we don't always know it. And so we planned an activation where we had one of our artists that was booked to perform. So he performed, and in the middle of the performance, we had one of our other guys come in with a big cigar, all corporate and suited up, and took the microphone. So we had given people little Monopoly houses on their way in. So my guy comes in with the big cigar. A couple other guys start taking everybody's houses that we've given them, giving them vouchers that say, you can get another house within 25 feet, but ain't no other houses in 25 feet. Because that's exactly what the developers were doing to the projects next door, right? Now, not everybody is down to make a statement like that in the face of the developers. They were not happy. The developers were in the building, you know what I mean? It caused a lot of chaos. People, by the time we were done with what we were doing, the floor was littered with these little vouchers that we'd given people, and 75% of the audience had walked out, right? But the crew was down with it. We made the point that we were trying to make, right? Which was like, yo, this shit is gentrification. Don't let them hide it from you with all this art, you know what I mean? So just having people, the power of a collective, right? When you can go in and be united and aligned in a vision, is super powerful. And that's why we were able to do everything that we did was collective power. Yeah, shout out to all the members, and everywhere that they are, spread out around the world right now.
So let's talk about Soul Collective. You've been in Soul Collective for a little while. How has Sacramento's art scene changed since you've started?
Man, Soul Collective, that's my home.
Or if you could explain a little bit about what Soul Collective is.
That's my home, that's my family. Soul Collective changed my life. Soul Collective was this space, I think I dreamed of my entire teens and young life. I dreamed of having a place like Soul Collective, and then I got there and was like, oh, it actually exists. It's a art, culture, activism center. Early on, we used to say art, culture, activism, because it was subversive. Right? As we go along, we start to get louder in the activism, but it's been a space that kind of led arts and culture in Sacramento from a very authentic place. Stella comes from the Washington Neighborhood Center before Soul Collective, and comes from studying under the Royal Chicano Air Force. If you don't know about the Royal Chicano Air Force, they're a huge art collective that comes out of here. They used to do all of Cesar Chavez's art, all of the art for the movement. These guys are amazing. They actually have a FBI file that says they create Adobe airplanes because Jose Montoya, who was a poet, wrote about them, and they put it in the file. So that's kind of the roots of Soul Collective, is this grassroots activism. Very Chicano, but also for the people, right? For all the people. So, we ran the Sacramento Activist School for years, as well as the Global Local Festival, the Dia de los Muertos Festival every year in Old Sac, Souls of the City. Just bringing a lot of culture and art into the city. Soul is everything to me.
So it seems like you've had a huge impact on the art scene in multiple, different collectives and aspects of your life, in your personal life, CFG, Soul Collective, it's really cool.
I love being in community and creating in community. I love creating community spaces. I think as someone in my younger years that didn't feel like I had a voice, didn't feel heard, and didn't feel safe, not much is as important to me as creating spaces where community can feel safe and heard and just be.
What do you think Sacramento still needs to better support disenfranchised creative voices?
Sacramento is severely lacking infrastructure right now. There are a whole generation of young people doing really cool things, having really cool ideas and pushing the culture forward, but they don't have the infrastructure to support them to get their work out the way that we did before COVID. There used to be a magazine called Submerge that was on every corner. There used to be a magazine called The News and Review that was on every corner. And as artists, you would strive to create something and gain enough notoriety to get those covers, and then you could be seen on
the whole city,
around
makes
everywhere
sense, yeah.
in the city, from Elk Grove up to Auburn, right? And it doesn't exist currently. I look at the path for young creatives right now, and a lot of it is making your own media, right? Because it's where do you go to get your media pushed out, right? Where does a young musician go to get promoted in Sacramento? Especially a rapper, right? Like, especially a rapper that's not your clean cut or your Christian religious, right? Like, if you're not safe for a Good Day Sacramento performance or an NPR or a CPR performance, right, for Capital Public Radio, what are the outlets? Where are the places? And it's really, they're leaving y'all out to dry.
Because
And
people feel like they have to go to LA and San Francisco to really get, industry connections and just support.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we push a lot of that's always been a thing, is that we pushed our creatives to other cities. Part of that is Sacramento's culture is not valuing creatives. I'll tell you right now, for all the work that I did for this city as Poet Laureate, the city paid me $3,000 a year, which is pathetic. It's not enough to cover 1 month of expenses, and the amount of work that I did for this city and the amount of money that this city has and spends on fucking tanks and things that get used against the people. Like, come on, y'all can sell a tank. You know, you don't need that. So there's a culture of not valuing the arts like we value civics, like we value government, like we value sports. And so that has to change, right? And that has to change from the top. So our big organizations, the Crocker, right? The Arena, Golden One, these folks, when they're hiring artists, y'all need to pay artists the value, not just what you can and what you can get away with in Sacramento, because we're starving for that exposure. I'd love to do something at the Arena or at the Crocker, right? But just because I'm hungry for that doesn't mean that I should be exploited, right? I should be able to eat too. So there's one piece of what Sacramento needs is the culture needs to shift around valuing artists, and part of that is the artists need to demand their value, right? I say no a lot, and I recommend to artists saying no a lot, because your no will strengthen your yes, right? And the more you say no, the more time you got to work in the studio on the craft and get better at what you do. But it also makes them take you seriously. It makes them feel your absence, and it builds that boundary. You know, people, I think, now know me enough to know, like, approach me like I'm valuable. You know what I mean? Like, whether you have a budget or you don't, I do a lot of things for good causes. I do a lot of things on the free. But you still have to understand my value and approach me like you know my value, right? And I think that's Sacramento's artists need to do that. The organizations and the arts organizations, the big ones especially, need to really start like putting in the value to the artists. And then there needs to be an infrastructure created.
For sure. It seems like you've had an inside look on city infrastructure, budgets, and things like that by working as Poet Laureate at Sacramento, right?
Yeah. I mean, a little bit. I try to stay out of the political spectrum as much as possible. You know, I don't. It can be very inauthentic. You know, it can also. That's why authenticity shines in the political field, is because it's so often inauthentic. But it has been very interesting working with the city and continuing to work with the city in building some of these programs and getting to have voice to tell them what I'm telling you right now.
What advice do you give to young creatives who are trying to stay authentic to themselves while still being in a system that's not exactly built or accustomed to them?
Trust your vision. You gotta know who you are. You've gotta know, like, before anyone else. And then protect the momentum, right? We talk a lot about protecting our energy, but we don't talk enough about protecting our momentum. So when I have an idea, a lot of times I hold it real tight to the chest until I'm ready to start moving on it. And then once it's moving already, then I might show it to my closest people, people who want to see me, who I know 100% want to see me succeed. That I know if they have a criticism, they're just going to be like, well, it would move more if you did this, right? Where if I have an idea and I just go out to the street, and I'm like, hey, everyone in Sacramento, I got this idea. They'll shoot it down. They'll tell me why it's not going to work. They'll tell me that you can't do that. That's not how policy works. That's not how, you'll never get that permitted. You'll never. So all of a sudden, y'all pushing against me. And I don't even have the momentum going on my project yet. And I got all these people pushing against it, right? So I think as creatives, you have to really guard your momentum, because there are going to be the naysayers. And you need them at a certain point in the process. They're going to naysay, and you're going to be like, okay, cool, I need to address that. But that's farther down the line. So I think when you're creating your thing, you have the vision, you got to protect that vision. You got to protect the momentum of that vision. And you just got to know. Like, I knew my entire life all I wanted to do was be a poet, and that I was going to be a poet laureate. Everybody said, you can't do that. That's not the path. You're not an academic. You didn't even go to school. You don't know about that. You can't tell me about forms. You can't teach this. You can't do this. But the amount of people like me not supposed to have keys to the city and get nominated for honorary doctorates. You know what I mean? But like, you decide what you do. They don't get to decide for you.
You are your own, like, you decide your own limits, you know, like your own boundaries.
And you have to know, like, it's beyond like, I think I can do it. Like, you have to know, I'm gonna do this. Right? If I say I'm gonna put out a book, there's no amount of anybody that can stop you from putting that book together and putting it out. You know what I mean? So it's that part of like, when you decide as a creative, I'm gonna do this, there can't be room. You gotta be bullheaded. You got like, I don't got room for anybody else's opinion, especially at the start. I'll make some eventually, but at the start, nah. I just gotta know this is finna be fire. And if you can't see it yet, get out the way until you can see it. But you'll see it eventually, you know.
So, there's a few more questions left. But speaking of books, you're coming out with a book soon. You know, tell us what it's called. Tell us all about it, you know, the process.
This book is called Unlocked. It's a collection of writings over the 5 years of me being laureate. It's called Unlocked, the Laureate Years. And the way that this book came about, honestly, a few weeks ago I lost one of my ribs, you know what I mean? Like, one of the homies that I've known since high school. And there was always an inspiration. And my man's was just a doer, you know? He like Anthony Gansler, my homie Gans. He was a star athlete. Then he went in to be an Army Ranger, and then he went in to be a firefighter. My man just like did it. Whatever it was, he did the thing. He was a doer.
It's so inspirational.
And I went to his funeral, and I just didn't know what to do with myself afterwards. You know what I mean? I had a lot of emotions. Couldn't really sleep, couldn't really eat. And was kind of just talking to my mans. And he did so much. And the city had hit me up and was like, hey, we want to honor your time as laureate. And so I just kind of get this idea of like, yo, put this book out. Put something together. And so over the course of like 3 days, I went through my notes app for the last 5 years and pulled different pieces out. Some of them are like finished poems, like the Pokey poem that's on TEDx, or Enough that's on poets.org. And some of these are published and gone around the world. Some of these are very personal, very rough. Things that I didn't ever think I'd release. Things that were written during the pandemic while I was struggling with my mental health, or struggling with grief. So it's an interesting collection through that 5 years and everything that I dealt with in that time. So I'm really proud of it. It's anxiety inducing. It's my first time releasing a book. I've always been more of a performance artist. So there is a little bit of like nervousness around that and how that's going to be received. But yeah, very exciting to also step into a new realm. You know, I'm always trying to push myself as a creative, and this definitely feels like that.
Real quick, what's the inside processes of making a book, you know, getting it published, printing, all that, you know, how was navigating that for the first time?
Yeah, so,
Do you have an editor?
yeah, it's a beautiful time to be a creative, you know? You can say what you want about the saturation of everything, but the ability to put together a book using a tool like Canva, right? So I got to do all the design more than I would in like a Google Doc or a Microsoft Word. So I got some nice design on it through
That
there.
looked really cool. I love it.
You know, like you can't beat Canva. I've been a designer for a long time, and I was a Photoshop person before Canva, and I'm definitely a convert. So you know, Canva creates everything. There's a program through Amazon called KDP where you can publish your own things, which is wild, unheard of. That's where I'm like, oh, it's amazing to be a creative in this time, to be able to self-publish like that.
Not needing a record label or a publisher or something.
Yeah. To be able to do distribution like I do on songs now was unheard of. The first time I remember sitting down with the record label being like, we can do this for you. And they were going to take 60% of my profits to be able to do exactly what I can do through DistroKid in an evening now. So, you know, this one's really raw. There wasn't an editor. It's me editing my notes. You know, there will be future books. There will be editors and publishers and all of that. This one needed to come out. You know, this was the entire 2-3 days that I'm like putting this together. I got ADHD, so I'm over here. I'm getting distracted by things. Every time that I'm pulling my phone out, I can hear my boy, hey, let's get to it. We got work to do. You know what I mean? So we wrote this together. When you open up that front page, you see all the people that I lost over the last like 5-6 years. And they all came with me on that journey. So we all sit together writing this book, putting this thing, you know what I mean? So that's the real process of it. It's just like, oh, we gonna get this thing out, you know what I mean? Like, and then it all just like lined up. It's Poetry Month. The city had hit me up to do this celebration, so it all just kind of made sense and it felt like it was time. And then, you know, the homie gave me that last little push to like, yo, get it done. Leave it here. You know, that was like the thing when I saw that church. The church was so full that I had to sit outside. You know what I'm saying? Like the fire engines pulled up with this, they all the way extended with this giant flag hanging down, and I feel how I feel about the government, but I also feel how I feel about my homie getting honored in that scale. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that he left, the legacy that he left really spoke to me and felt like we were sitting together working on this because this was him helping me leave a part of my legacy.
Final question. How was it going on TEDx, you know, TEDx Folsom, you know, talk a little bit about that experience. That's a big, you know, really cool to, you know, be like, oh yeah, I've been on TEDx, you know, really get your words to such a wide audience, you know?
Yeah, it's a wild thing to be able to say I've been a TEDx performer. And the way that all happened, again, you know, I'm a big believer in alignment. And then when you do what you're supposed to be doing, then like the opportunities come. So I'm at work with a client one afternoon, and she was like, hey, I just saw this opening for TEDx is looking for performers in Folsom. I'm gonna send you a link. And that day I happened to have like a little time that afternoon. So I put together an application, and they were talking about, their theme was reimagining. So I have a poem called the Pokey Poem that's about mental health and talking to young people about mental health. So I submit that poem, and they're like, yeah, let's do it. So kind of the behind the scenes is that the TED TEDx event is the day after my father passed, a year, like the year anniversary. So the practice day is the day that my father passed. And so I wake up that day feeling all of it, and then have to go do this performance. Like, I'm literally like wearing my sunglasses inside because I've been crying my face off all morning. Like, I'm not okay. I get onto the stage and they're like, "Can you do the thing?" And the staff starts panicking. We don't have any notes for him. We don't have any prompts for him. We don't have videos. We don't have it. So I get up. I do my poem. I've done this poem a bunch. I'm a performer, you know. Whoa, when I get done. And it was partially because I'm a performer, but it was also partially like I put everything that hurt that day into that poem, right? And that same, like, you know, being able to see Pops in the back, being real proud of his boy being on TEDx. My dad would have been so hyped to tell people that, right? So yeah, it was a lot emotionally in the background, and then to actually do it, you know, I don't think I even realized until the night before, like, oh my God, I'm about to do a TEDx performance. Like, everything changes from this point, right? Like, being able to say TEDx performer hits different on the resume.
Definitely.
So yeah, it didn't hit me until the night before, and then I was like, oh my God, am I ready for this? Am I like, but yeah, it was so well received. Everyone was so kind, and it was such a beautiful process working with everyone. You know, I told Jen Oliver, who runs TEDx over there, I said, yo, I want to actually give a speech, like I want to do one on joy. And she was so like, yes, whenever you're ready. So I've been working behind the scenes a little bit on a project called The Great Joy Hunt.
Oh, cool.
So studying like the neuroscience of joy, and how we can just create paths to more joy for our people. So look forward to that TED Talk in, like, I don't know, 2026.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what else can we look forward to? Future projects, you know, what are you working on?
Yeah, so I just started working locally with Universal Cafe, which is amazing, and I'm so hype about this work. They're a food recovery organization. They recover food from folks and give it to the community. I think mutual aid is going to be huge in the coming 4 years plus. So I'm real excited to be hands-on in some of that work, as well as working with like recently liberated neighbors. You know what I'm saying? So that's a big part. And then, you know, I'm working on The Great Joy Hunt, which is going to be a book and a workbook and a program, and I'm still figuring out everything that it's going to be. Because when I started trying to write a book on joy, I was like, oh, you don't know enough. So I started studying, and I started studying the neuroscience, and I'm almost to where I start telling people I'm a neuroscientist now. So I'm really excited about that work and to see just where all the intersections are of the poetry and the joy hunt, and the mutual aid and universal. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I would expect probably another book this year. I've been working on a collection of short poems that also serve as divinations, that also serve as, like, you could piece them together for young people to create their own poems.
Wow.
So it's a whole
Cool.
thing, and I'm talking to a couple of publishers right now around, just doing some of that. And then, you know, you could always expect me to pop up with an event here or there. We got one coming up called Drunk Poetry, which is a phenomenon, and it's back. People have been excited for that one. And then, you never know. You know, it's always, we as artists, we're always responsive to the surroundings and to what's going on. And in community, I'm always trying to respond to what the people need. and just keep my ear to the streets, and however we can give the people platforms and safe spaces and resources. That's always what we're going to be on. So wherever that's needed, that's where I'll be.
Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Learned so much. Truly an inspiring journey. One of our best conversations so far, definitely. Where can people who are listening to this find you at? You know?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Andru Defeye. That's ANDRUDEFEYE. And I'm also on the Spotify, the Apple Music, anywhere you go get music. All across the platforms you can find me on, all over YouTube, from live streams to performances to all of that. But yeah, Instagram's probably the closest direct contact.
Thank you. Any last questions or any last comments for our viewers? You know, any last quotes, inspiration?
Don't let nobody tell you anything about you. That's it. Nobody can tell you anything about you. You got it. ZFG.
Thank you. Only your therapist can tell you a little bit.
Yeah. And your chat GPT if you're honest with it.
Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started. I use it like that, you know.
Yo, while we're still rolling, use your chat GPT as a therapist, y'all. Like, don't be afraid to sit down and really, like, ask it if, like, there are patterns you might not be seeing.
I'll break down whole situations and things, and it'll really give me, like, sometimes it won't be what you want to hear. You'll be like, okay.
I'll give it a whole situation and be like, yo, how might my trauma be impacting this that I'm unaware of? Right? Like, and it'll give you that real. So I think, especially for my homies that can't afford therapy, because this comes with an expensive bill sometimes. I think there's a real use for ChatGPT that I don't want people sleeping on. Definitely. That you can really get that professional help. You know, again, I recommend in tandem when you can, but you know, we stop the bleeding however we can, and then we get to the hospital, right? So if you need to talk to someone, if you need mental health support, like, highly recommend ChatGPT.
It helps process things, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on. We're looking forward to your future projects and everything that you're doing for the community. Thank you so much.
Bang, bang. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Good job, Jabari.